Better Call Saul, Season 6, Episode 10. As I said last week, they could really go in any direction for this episode based on where they left it off in Episode 9. And I thought we would get a Gene Takovich episode at the end of the season, the very last episode, but instead we got one today, which I was not expecting. Of course, the last time we saw Gene was when he got made by the taxi driver and he called up the vacuum guy, and then he decided not to go ahead with making himself disappear again and that he was going to deal with it himself. So in a sense, it does make sense that there are 2 episodes for Gene. I assume there is obviously going to be one more for him. And it makes sense, because you need 1 episode for him to deal with this problem that he's got, and then another episode to wrap up his story. So today's episode felt like it was somewhat trying to wrap up and set up the ending of Gene's story, which is why it wasn't one of the best ones we've had this season, why it wasn't maybe the most entertaining. But it was still a necessary one, and it was still a good watch. Gene finally allows Saul to come back to the surface after so long of keeping him bottled up in, a scheme to get the cabbie off his back, but also I think just so that he can feel alive again, and because he used to be the guy that you didn't really mess with. I think that's sort of what he felt on the phone when he said, I'm going to deal with it myself. He didn't want to just run and hide anymore. He wanted to stand up for himself. And that's what he wanted to do, and he was also getting a massive thrill out of it, as he always did with his old schemes. I really enjoyed this setup, his visits to the security office with the Cinnabon packages. I'm thinking he's going to drug the Cinnabon rolls and, to try and knock out the security guards. But really, he's just gauging his window of opportunity. That's the thing with this show. It always makes you assume one thing, or, you always brainstorm something and then it's always something else. And one of the best things this show does is montages. They have so many great montage sequences throughout this show, and there's another good one here as well, when it's just Gene scheming, visiting the security office, having banter with these security officers. It's great to see. I love it. It's always this upbeat music and this really slick editing, and it was very entertaining, as all the montages have been. It was kind of strange watching a whole episode in black and white, but it was still, still a good watch. It still looked good, and it was really interesting to see Saul come back throughout Gene. Obviously, Gene has kept Saul within, because he's been panicked and laying low, and he's scared that he's going to get made. So he's just kept it all bottled up because he's so fearful of anyone discovering who he really was. But we know with Gene that he watches all the old tapes of his advertisements and things like that, so that he misses it. That's who he really would prefer to be. That's who he loved to be. So it makes sense that finally he says, I want to be Saul again, even if it's just for a day. He wants to be Saul again. I mean, it was interesting at the end when Saul is, or Gene, whatever. This guy has 3 names. I never know which one to pick. But when Gene is in the mall and he's picking up the snazzy shirt and the snazzy tie, and he's looking at it and he's like considering it, and obviously he puts it back, which was interesting because you wonder if this is like a point, like a pivotal moment where he says, I'm going to be Saul again. But in a sense, he can't. So it's a weird one. He's caught in this weird middle ground where he no longer really wants to be hiding, and he wants to embrace who he used to be, but how can he do that, without ending up in prison? It just begs the question of how his story will end. Will he just keep it locked up and hide away, or will he just go out with a bang and say, screw it, I'm Saul Goodman? Of course, the poster for season 6 is Gene in black and white, but he's putting on a bright red blazer. It's meant to be him finally becoming Saul again after all those years of hiding. So right now he's on the fence, and eventually we're going to see him make this decision. I assume the posters wouldn't show him putting on that red blazer if it's not going to happen, if he's not actually going to embrace who he was one more time, or at least, forever. The timing of this episode is interesting, but I think it does make sense to put this episode at this point, just based off of last week's episode where they left it on sort of a cut-off point where they could go any direction, like I said. So I think it makes sense to put it here, but of course there's only 3 episodes left. I feel like we are going to get another Gene episode, or at least, there's got to be a decent amount of time with Gene again. And on top of that, of course, we are going to have the return of Walt and Jesse, which is highly anticipated. So, we're going to have some Breaking Bad era stuff. So it's interesting, and it makes me curious about how they are going to balance these episodes and where they are going to spend their time. I would still think that the next time we see Gene would be the last episode of the show. I think that would make sense based on this episode. However, I recently discovered that they actually do these like 20-30 second preview like trailers after a new episode drops. I don't think they do it for like UK Netflix, but they do it in America, and then you can just find it on YouTube. And the preview was once again in black and white, which is of course associating to Jean, and it just shows a car pulling up to a road. Now, if I had to guess, just wild guess, I would say that's to do with Jean trying to track down Kim, because originally she was from like Kansas, Nebraska border, and of course Jean is in Omaha, Nebraska, so you know that can't be coincidental that she's from there. And you know, Jimmy / Saul / Jean has ended up there. You know, he's not far from her. He's also saying something along the lines of, before you know it, you'll forget all about it. I mean, I don't even want to bother speculating that, because it won't be right anyway. This is one of the most difficult shows to predict. So I don't know what that means. I don't know who he's talking to, what he's talking about, but we'll see one day. I don't really feel like another Jean episode just after this one is the best idea, like another 50 minutes with Jean, but I'm open to the idea of maybe having an episode that splits between Jean and Saul. Maybe they do that for the remainder of the 3 episodes. I think that could be an interesting thing, maybe cutting back and forth. If they could piece that together in an effective way, I think that would be a cool thing to do, because I want to see more of Jean, because I want to know how his story ends, and I also want to see some more Saul from Breaking Bad. But I also want to see a little bit more Jimmy. Maybe that bit between Jimmy and Saul. I'm curious as to whether they'll actually explore that bit from where we left when Kim left him, and his little transition into Saul. I don't know if they're really going to explore that, because I was always under the assumption with the start of this show that they would really show that transition completely, you know, the meeting. You know, I didn't think that they would just cut it at this certain point and then just sort of flip to Saul. But of course we have all the, you know, the backstory and all the scenes we need to make it make sense as to how Jimmy ends up becoming Saul. So it's not necessary for them to fill that little gap, but part of me is curious to see a little bit more there. Regardless, I would say this was an episode that probably felt a little less exciting, especially compared to the last 3 episodes, which have been incredible. However, it has nods back, such as Marco's ring and a mention of Walt, and finally seeing Jean embrace who he really is after God knows how many years of, you know, keeping it under wraps. I mean, to think this is the same character that we saw all the way back in season 1, you know, having quarrels with his brother, it's a crazy evolution of a character. It's so impressive, and especially, you know, if you put Breaking Bad, of course, you've got to remember that, you know, if you watched Better Call Saul, then Breaking Bad, and then like all the Jean scenes, it'd be one hell of a story. But yeah, overall, not the best episode, but still a damn good piece of television, and you know, it's setting things up nicely once again for the final 3 episodes. I'd give today's episode an 8.5 out of 10. If you've seen the episode, please let me know what you think about it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.